It's Joe and Nix and Nellie, and we are lucky enough to sit down on this beautiful Brisbane afternoon for afternoon tea with Dr Meng Tan, who is the Director of Neurology at Gold Coast Health. Meng, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
Now, Meng, as you know, we've had people submitting Ask a Neurologist questions via Twitter and Instagram and our website and our Facebook page. We've had a bunch of questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And we're going to fire those questions off to you today to see if you can enlighten us on some of these mysteries of the brain and epilepsy. That's cool?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. All right. So, Dr. Tan, if we can start out with our first question. I think this one was submitted by Twitter, or via Twitter, I should say. It's about epileptic seizures, and are they all necessarily damaging to the brain when they happen?
Brief seizures probably don't do any damage that we can detect. Not as single events anyway. Someone who has very frequent seizures, and especially prolonged seizures, there is probably some change that is occurring in the brain after that. Mostly about entrenching that seizure tendency so it's more persistent and perhaps more difficult to control. And in extreme cases where the seizure just goes on and never ends, a condition that's called status epilepticus, that probably has a very similar effect.
Right.
So these are very unwell patients who get admitted to hospital and go to the intensive care unit.
Right. Okay.
And often are put into an induced coma to stop their seizures because there's no other way of stopping it. Okay. But the sort of everyday seizures that occur that patients don't need to go to hospital for probably don't do that much.
Right. Well, that's good. That's really good to know and very interesting. A second question also relates to seizures, but it also relates to another neurological condition, migraine. Both of these conditions, people report something that's called an aura. What causes that aura, as they're called?
Okay. Well, bearing in mind that a seizure is an electrical disturbance of the brain.
Right, yep.
What an aura is, and which not all patients report, some do, some don't. What an aura is it's really the beginning of a seizure. So the electrical disturbance has already commenced.
Right.
And the symptoms that the patient perceives at that time, which may be, depending on the patient, a funny smell or taste, or a strong sense of deja vu, that is indicative of which part of the brain is affected by the electrical disturbance at that time. Now, that if that then spreads to another part of the brain or involves a larger part of the brain, then more intense features, symptoms that the patient and their family call the seizure proper, the seizure itself, then those things may develop.
Right.
Or perhaps the electrical disturbance will peter out before it gets to that, and then they just get the aura, but it doesn't progress to what's called the seizure.
Without the seizure.
Yeah. And in migraine, a similar explanation underlies the aura, which is to say the way that the migraine affects the brain and the part of the brain that's affected. That moves, that changes with time. The disturbance spreads, and that's why patients with migraine report that the tingling moves from one part of the body and spreads to another part of the body, for example, or the visual blurring, visual disturbance that they have moves around over a period of minutes. So different type of disturbance, but the same underlying explanation.
So it's a progression of the same thing in seizures and in migraine.
Yep.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. Okay, so jumping back to epilepsy, something that a lot of people have reported, I guess is the best word, or told us, us Cheeky Neurons and our friends, is that they had epilepsy as a child, but they grew out of their epilepsy. Why do people grow out of their epilepsy? What happens there?
So, no doubt one of the factors is that as the brain develops with age, from infancy, childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, that it's chemically and electrically different. Okay, so the developmental process results in some change in the way that the brain works. And so it stands to reason then that the vulnerability to some disturbance like having seizures may also change with time. Now, not everybody is so fortunate that they grow out of their epilepsy, and patients with epilepsy have the same, we think of them as having the same condition, epilepsy, but really epilepsy is a collection of different conditions where the seizures are different, the age at which the seizures start is different, whether or not the seizures disappear with time is also highly variable. And that's, I think, one of the fascinating things about seeing patients with epilepsy is that there's no one size fits all, there's no answer that applies to everybody. We recognise that there are certain types of epilepsy that have a tendency to begin at a certain age, and that it's highly likely in those types of epilepsy that by a later age the seizure tendency will have disappeared.
Right.
But we also recognise that other types of epilepsy are less likely to do so.
Right.
So it's a sort of horses for courses. Everyone's different. Everyone's an individual.
Yeah. Every brain is different, but it is true that over development, some people will stop having seizures when they did have seizures and epilepsy as a child.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Brains are so fun like that. They're so cool. Okay. So speaking of epilepsy, but changing the focus from the brain to the tummy. We got a question submitted, excuse me, that's really good. We got a question submitted via Instagram, which was, how does what I eat affect my epilepsy?
Okay. Well, again, recognising that all patients are different, and so dietary influences on epilepsy may be stronger for some patients than others. A single meal or a single item of food is unlikely to increase or decrease your chance of having a seizure for the vast majority of patients.
Right.
However, depending upon the makeup of the entire diet, and again depending upon the patient, this may have an influence on the likelihood of having a seizure or the overall degree of seizure control. So
the whole diet.
The whole diet.
Everything you eat, everything you drink.
Sort of put together.
Right. Okay.
So, and the best understood example of this is the ketogenic diet. So this is a type of diet that has been used most often in children who have very poorly controlled epilepsy, where medications haven't been successful, particularly beneficial in controlling seizures, but many of them have found a meaningful reduction in their seizures with the institution of this diet.
Right.
There are other diets that have been looked at more recently, and again they seem to have some effect in some patients who are fortunate enough to respond in that way.
Right. Yeah. So it may affect your epilepsy, it may affect the amount of seizures that you have, or maybe the frequency, but certainly having one beautiful spinach and feta Danish probably isn't going to change my overall experience.
Unfortunately, neither for the better nor the worse.
It's definitely for the better, trust me. Okay, thank you for that answer. That's a brilliant answer. Our next question relates to sleep. This was a question, submitted via Twitter. And the question was basically, how much sleep do I need as a person with epilepsy?
Well, a common, again, nothing's universal here, nothing applies to everybody, a common experience that people with epilepsy share with me is that sleep deprivation tends to bring on seizures.
So not enough sleep.
Not enough sleep.
Yeah.
But to go to your question, how much sleep is enough is not a question that has a single answer for everyone.
Yeah.
And if we broaden the scope and not just limit ourselves to people who have epilepsy. Obviously, that's the focus of our discussion.
Yeah.
But
everybody's got a brain, right?
In people with and without epilepsy, how much sleep do they need? Well, most of us recognise that the answer is it really depends. You know, some people get by with an incredibly little amount of sleep, right? And yet they're bright as a button every single day. And other people find they need to sleep about half the day.
Yeah.
So I mean,
that's also not me.
They're two extreme. They're two extreme ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I think we can apply the same rationale to patients who have epilepsy. So I can't give you a number like 8 hours or 10 hours, but I can say that that recognising that people often report sleep deprivation as a factor that makes it more likely they're going to have a seizure the following day or the day after that, that someone who reports to me, oh, you know, when I'm waking up in the morning because it's time, I have to go to school, I have to go to work, whatever it is, and I don't feel that I've got a good night's sleep, I don't feel refreshed, that would concern me, particularly if that patient had epilepsy, that they might be jeopardising their seizure control.
Right, okay. So it's important to get enough sleep for you. Everybody's different, but don't let yourself get too tired, I guess. That's a pretty short answer to that.
I think we can all live by those words.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Tan. So our next and our last question that was submitted via Twitter, I believe, from memory as well, relates to getting excited. Something that Nix and Nelly are very good at, but it relates to people, us getting excited when we go to a party or something, because everyone loves a party. But sometimes people who have epilepsy report that when they have a bit too much fun, get too excited at a party, then that can lead to seizures. Why does that happen?
Okay. Well, I have to admit that this is something that I haven't heard put in the same way before. I should say that I see adult patients who have epilepsy. I don't see children who have epilepsy.
Hey, adults go to parties too.
Maybe you do.
I go to cheeky parties.
Right.
Cheeky parties.
You're
like
right.
Boss's birthday party. Yeah.
Adults go to parties too. Adult patients, I haven't had an adult patient yet come to me and say that they felt they had the seizure because they went to the party.
Right.
There might be something else involved. If we think about the previous question, it might be that they were sleep deprived, because adults do get sleep deprived at parties, and they get up to some other business at parties.
A bit too late night. Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm sure that that patients have noticed that they go to parties and have seizures.
Yeah.
What I have heard, that's put a little bit more broadly, more generically, is patients report that, very commonly report that emotional stress seems to be associated with their seizures.
Right.
And they suspect that that it's a stressful state that brings on seizures. So perhaps that overlaps with what your questioner had noticed about the excitement.
Stress can be something positive or something negative, right? I mean, the body experiences stress when you do something really exciting and happy. A common example that has been relevant to me and probably yourself in your life was the whole getting married and having kids and that kind of, grown-up thing. But that can be a happy stress, but still stress.
Yes.
Yeah, and same kind of thing probably happens to our bodies and our brains when we have a really good time at a party.
I think it may well be true, and the adults, the adults that I see have experiences like getting married and moving house and changing the city in which they live.
Sure.
And so one of the things that children have to look forward to, I suppose, is that they're going to experience a lot more stress as adults.
But there's still more parties and they're fun, so don't worry. All right, Dr. Tan, look, thank you so much for being our Ask a Neurologist guest. This has been a great and very interesting conversation, and I'm very grateful. We're all very grateful. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and I believe Dr. Tan might be amenable or accepting of doing another Ask a Neurologist interview in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks for inviting me to do it this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tan, and to everyone at Poss's birthday party, thanks so much. Hope you're having a good time. See you later.